zatitxu hau igual bateratzen, orduan eskatuko Diego Alaineri eta Juleri bere aurkezpenak egin, eta gero zabalduko dugu tartea solasaldia jarraitzeko. Ze asmoa da hori, ordu bat tarditan, edo, amaitzeko, edo, bai. Vale, okay, thank you again, Alan, for joining the discussion. Bueno, Alan Gagnon da irakaslea, ikusten duzuen bere perfila, Canada Researcher in Quebec and Canadian Studies, Montrealen dago, kokatuta, baina interesantena da, eta nik uste aipatu behar da, bere bi liburu oso interesgarriak euskaraz dagoz, itzulita, ibapen argitaratu, orduan nahi baduzue, bere ideiak eta bere testua jarraitu, euskaraz dago aukera. So I already mentioned that we have the possibility to follow your ideas through books in Basque, so I'm very pleased to have that opportunity. And so please, if you, we are thinking about doing the two interventions and together, and then we will take up questions. Thank you.
Esker Gasco. It's a pleasure, obviously, for me to be here in the Basque Country. I'd like to thank the organizer for this event, and Julie Goico Echea in particular, who made my visit here possible. I also was very pleased to be sitting with Graham Avery a few minutes ago. It seems like we are doing a tour together to discuss independentist, nationalist, and federalist issues, so it was a pleasure to see him again. And obviously here today to reconnect with the Basque people and the Basque institution. I think there's a lot of issue at stake. I have entitled my paper Constitutional Referendums, I would say, as a democratic challenge. I think the referendum are there as democratic challenges. I don't pretend to be neutral. I cannot be neutral. I'm not, I'm a Quebecer, I'm a Francophone Quebecers. So as such, I take a position. Were I to be an Aboriginal Quebecers or an Anglophone Quebecers, probably my position would be slightly different. So as I will move around my explanation with respect to Canada in particular, you have to keep that in mind, because obviously we do not agree on each and everything I'm going to be saying here today. So the objective essentially for me is it's unity and diversity, as was mentioned in the earlier table, but it's unity of purpose and multiplicity of visions. And this, we need to take them in tandem. I felt comforted when I heard this morning Martin Garritano speaking of citizen engagement and democracy at the same time. Those need to be accompanied. They need to accompany each other. So by way of introduction, I will say a few words about Canada, the UK, and Spain. I will then discuss some contrasting strategies that have been developed by different countries. And I will look at the emerging scenarios, especially looking at the democratic principle, the principle of feasibility for people who claim and want to make gesture toward independence, and also the ultimate principle, which is the principle of effectiveness, or if you prefer, effectivity. So as a starting point, let's remind ourselves that most countries have been founded following some acts of violence. So to revert to a referendum as a political instrument is a clear democratic advance. It is a noble idea, a noble political project. It is a way by which you can resist domination through a clear statement. It's a process, it's a progress for humanity. As a caveat and in order, I will be examining Quebec in a comparative perspective, and especially the relation with the Basque Country, Catalonia, Scotland, as the main cases in point. Without being perfect, Canada, although a young country, is already a well-established democracy. Over time, Canada has emancipated itself from the British Empire and seeks to advance its own national project and to superimpose a Canadian identity on top of all other identities at the risk of alienating its founding nation. This has taken place with respect to the Aboriginal, the Acadian, and the French Canadian. In contrast, I would depict the United Kingdom as an established democracy and an old country that has been challenged at various critical historical moments to reassess its power relations with its national partners. Finally, I will qualify Spain as an old country that has embodied a young and fragile democracy, uncertain about its own capabilities at responding to its own demons. Each of these countries has imposed or attempted to impose its political authority on the member communities at the origin of the Constitutional Pact with unequal degree of success. When examining these three cases, we can see the uneven capabilities of the majority nation at accommodating, recognizing, and empowering minority nations. Indeed, in some cases, we can even speak of efforts at misrecognizing and of threat to bully when not to disempower national communities. Cases of misrecognition have contributed to increased political tension with various levels of intensity. In the case of Quebec and Scotland, it appears that defining the people has been much less of a problem, since in both cases the central government agreed that the Scottish and the Quebec nation could cast a vote with respect to their constitutional future. And that, although the Canadians remain silent on this, that these constitutive nations have the right to hold a referendum on their political future within the all-encompassing state. One of the toughest questions to be addressed in the case of Spain has been to determine who the people is, who the people that can be self-determined, who is the people that can self-determine. This is currently a problem in Catalonia, and this has also been a problem in the case of the Basque Country at the time of the Plan Ibarretxe. So in Canada and in the UK, two firmly established multinational democratic states, the political argument is that there exists more than one demos. And to borrow the idea from Will Kymlicka, that, and I quote, the authority from the larger political community cannot be assumed to take precedence over the authority of the constituent national communities. If democracy is the rule of the people, national minorities made the claim that there is more than one people, each with the right to rule themselves, end of quote. Shortly after the 1995 Quebec referendum that was lost by the nationalists by 52,000 votes, less than 1%, Ottawa moved quickly to adopt what I have called a containment strategy, known as Plan B. Here is how Stéphane Dion, a key political actor, depicted it and why he felt the central government was justified to go ahead with such a containment strategy. I quote Dion here very briefly. According to the tenets of containment, nationalists cannot be contented. They need their own country. The more you give them, the more they will demand, leading eventually to secession. Each new concession, Dion says, will allow them to mark off more of their territory, to define themselves as increasingly exclusive us, to further exclude the other groups, and to reject common institutions that are perceived as a threat to the nation and embodiment of a foreign entity, end of quote. Obviously, I don't agree with Stéphane Dion's position. So rather than attempting to appease political tension and to imagine scenarios to get out of the political impasse, as suggested by most engaged Quebecers intellectuals, political actors in Ottawa have responded to Quebec claims by advancing a competing and exclusive Canadian nation-building project. With the Liberals in Ottawa under the leadership of Trudeau and then under the leadership of Chrétien, the central government has generally been pursuing a strategy of containment through different means. For instance, there was the unilateral repatriation of the Canadian Constitution from Britain in 81-82. There was the imposition of a constitutional amending formula in 1982 that failed to recognize Quebec's historic veto right, and in fact, that removed Quebec's veto right from existence. Third, the repeated use by the central government of its spending power in areas of exclusive provincial jurisdictions, meaning that Ottawa can intervene as it wants in area of exclusive provincial jurisdictions. You will agree with me that this is not something that ought to be tolerated. The adoption in 1999 of a social union framework without the consent of Quebec. Again, another imposition. And we can add a lot of similar cases, one of which is the use of public funds to advance Canadian unity and identity, as well as to promote the central government initiative within Quebec. In the meantime, the governing party in Ottawa decided to call upon the Supreme Court, and this is what is extremely relevant for us today, to examine if, based on and only on Canadian jurisprudence, Quebec or any other member state of the Federation, for that matter, have the right to secede from the country. But as I mentioned, based uniquely on Canadian jurisprudence. The following questions were expressed as such. First, under the Constitution of Canada, can the National Assembly or its government effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally? Second question, does international law give the National Assembly or its government the right to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally? The key word is always unilaterally. In this regard, is there a right to self-determination under international law that will give the National Assembly or the Quebec government the right to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally? And the third question, to which the court did not answer, in the event of a conflict between domestic and international law on the right of the National Assembly or Quebec, the Quebec government to effect the secession of Quebec from Canada unilaterally, which will take precedence in Canada? As I said, the last one, the court did not dare answering. The Supreme Court delivered its unanimous response on August 20th, 1998. Expectedly and in summary, the Supreme Court stated that Quebec could not simply break up from Canada. So a unilateral declaration of independence was not acceptable. The court also stipulated that were Quebec to seek to obtain its independence from Canada, the Canadian government would have the obligation to negotiate the terms of secession in good faith as long as two conditions are met. First condition, Quebec needs to decide on a clear question. Second condition, to be considered, a referendum needed to obtain a clear majority. It remains unclear, though, what the court exactly understood to mean a clear majority. For most Quebecers, it means 50% plus one, that is absolute majority vote, while for other partners in the Federation, it usually referred to a qualified majority, that is a result significantly higher than 50% plus one. In its 1998 reference case, the Supreme Court of Canada made clear that although Quebec has a recognized right to secede, some principle could not trump other principles. This is known as the equal primordiality thesis, stressing that the identical political value must be given to unity and multiplicity. So what mattered was less the right of Quebec to secede than the percentage to be obtained in order to be in a position to proceed. This judicial interpretation of Canada's highest tribunal confirms that the Quebec government was free to consult its population in 1980 and in 1995 with respect to its political future in, or if you want, within or without Canada. In other words, the principle of secession has been accepted as being legitimate by the Supreme Court of Canada. This decision contributed to ease somewhat existing tension between Quebec and Ottawa and contributed to give back some legitimacy to the Supreme Court of Canada, which credibility had been severely diminished when declaring in 1980 that Ottawa could proceed to patriate the Constitution from Britain after having obtained substantial support from the member state of the Federation. So at the time, it meant that Quebec, from that moment onwards, could be circumvented by the central government as long as it has the support of a substantial number of Anglophone provinces. To come back to the reference case, Quebec right to secede, both sides were quick to declare victory. Ottawa looked at one side of the reference case, that is the idea that the unilateral declaration of independence would be declared illegal under Canadian law and current international law. While the Quebec government was pleased to read that the Supreme Court of Canada would be willing to recognize, under certain conditions, Quebec right to self-determination. The Supreme Court judges stayed away from the most controversial issues, such as the amendment procedure that would be used were Quebec attempting to secede, the role of other member states, the question of Aboriginal peoples, borders, the sharing of assets, and so on and so forth. The Supreme Court reference identified also a series of four constitutional principles, namely federalism, democracy, constitutionalism and the rule of law, and respect for minority rights, that need to be taken into account when reimagining relations between political communities and institutions that shape the country. In a sense, these principles constitute the cornerstone of the unwritten constitution. These principles are of equal value and cannot be traded once against the other. None of those principles can trump the other principle. The Supreme Court of Canada's reference on the right of Quebec to secede provided important insight as to how an equitable process of national self-determination could be undertaken by the Quebec government, and warned Quebec's partner in the Federation of the need to engage de bonne foi into a Canadian conversation. In paragraph 92, the Supreme Court states, and I quote, "The continued existence and operation of the Canadian constitutional order cannot remain indifferent to the clear expression of a clear majority of Quebecers that they no longer wish to remain in Canada. This would amount to the assertion that other constitutionally recognized principles necessarily trump the clearly expressed democratic will of the people of Quebec. Such a proposition fails to give sufficient weight to the underlying constitutional principle that must inform the amendment formula, including the principle of democracy and federalism. The rights of other provinces and the federal government cannot deny the right of the Quebec government to pursue secession, should a clear majority of the people of Quebec choose that goal, so long as in doing so, and here I need to stress, Quebec respect the right of others. Negotiation would be necessary to address the interests of the federal government. It would be necessary also to pay attention to the right of other provinces and other participants, as well as the right of all Canadians, both within or outside Quebec. So if you want here, if you want to scratch a bit the surface, you will see there is a double bind in this, what is proposed by the Supreme Court of Canada. The secession reference points to the possibility of other methods of responding to claims making beyond containment and contentment dyad that I referred to at the very outset. However, rather than taking seriously the Supreme Court's advice, the central government wanted to settle score with Quebec and embark on a risky road by adopting what it terms the Clarity Act, which in fact seeked to fix the rule of the game were Quebec or any member state of the Federation up to go ahead with a new referendum. The act was passed in June 2000. The Clarity Act, which in fact sort of tried to render void the position of the Supreme Court, reads, I will present you with 6 key points of the Clarity Act. The first one is that the House of Commons has the power to determine if a referendum question is clear before the people could vote. A bit reminiscent of what's happening in the case of Scotland. Second, only in a unitary state. Here, Canada being a federal state is a different matter. Point 2, only a question concerning secession will be considered clear. Third, Ottawa will wait after the votes are counted before stating what is a clear result, suggesting that 50% plus 1 was unacceptable and that a substantial majority would be necessary. Fourth, Ottawa's member state of the Federation and Aboriginal nation will be part of the negotiation process. 5, Ottawa could override a vote in favor of secession if it feels that aspects of the Clarity Bill have been violated, not of the Supreme Court rendering, but of the federal government bill. Sixth, an amendment to the Constitution would be required to allow the secession of a province. Now, this, I would call it, aggressive and provocative gesture on the part of the central government led many members of the Quebec National Assembly to respond by adopting its own act in order to advance its power and defend Quebec's fundamental rights and prerogatives within or without Canada. Political tension increased significantly as Quebec was determined to stop any other government attempting to limit its own political authority. Article 13 of the Act stipulated that no other parliament or government may reduce the power, authority, sovereignty, or legitimacy of the Quebec National Assembly or impose constraint on the democratic will of the Quebec people to determine its own future, end of quote. So the passing of the Act respecting the exercise of the fundamental rights and prerogative of the Quebec people and the Quebec state put a stop, at least for a while, to the constitutional saga between Ottawa and Quebec, as both sides feel that they made clear to the other where they exactly stand on the matter of Quebec right to secede. What's next? Now I move obviously from the constitutional juridical dimension to the more political dimension. In their efforts to maintain the status quo and discourage the holding of referendum, majority nations represented respectively by Ottawa, Madrid, and London have developed a two-pronged strategy. First, by pointing out a series of constitutional and political repercussions as well as economic consequences to discourage the member state from holding a genuine referendum. Second, by limiting options available as much as possible by enlarging the gap between the current situation and the new situation. So to illustrate the first element on this strategy with respect to Quebec, Quebecers were told about economic consequences were they to dare again going ahead with a referendum. Loss of jobs, loss of prestige and exclusion from international forum, increased rivalries and bickering, social disruptions, uncertainty, increased debts, increase of interest rates. A lot. Living condition being threatened, old age pension being reduced or even lost, individual right being jeopardized if Quebec were to move with a third referendum, loss of passport, frontiers to be renegotiated, loss of population, Aboriginal right to be renegotiated in full, amendment procedures to be initiated before secession could be granted. Many of those elements, as you also followed the Catalan situation, a lot of those were also mentioned. All of this in order to make the status quo looks like an ideal situation, viable, and in the end, the best and only available option in the mind of voters. However, painting such a poor image could backfire since people will not consider such a scenario being credible. Now let's turn our attention to the second element of the strategy. Here the idea is to reduce and limit, to contain democratic options to the largest imaginable extent. In the case of Catalonia and the Basque Country, the central state has simply refused to authorize the holding of a referendum, arguing that Madrid alone is the sole constituent power, and that additionally this option simply does not exist in the Constitution. In the case of Scotland and Quebec, the situation is quite different. After two failed attempts by the Quebec government to advance in 1980 a sovereignty association proposal, followed in 1995 by sovereignty partnership scenario, the central government has decided to reduce Quebec's option by seeking to impose its own authority and power on all member states. Contrary to what was supposed and proposed by the Supreme Court in the 1998 reference case, Ottawa now requires that Quebecers express themselves on the right of exit without being able to propose any constitutional proposals, any constitutional modification. In other words, the only acceptable question will be a direct and specific question on secession. No Devo Max option could be even considered. No trying to make any adjustment to satisfy any member state. It's a take it or leave it, but it's extremely difficult to leave it. Our colleague Stephen Tierney commented critically on the strategy imagined by Ottawa when he stated about the Clarity Act that it seems to constrain the constitutional option which can be presented to the people of a province in a sovereignty referendum. Quote, "A clear question of the will of the population of a province that the province sees to be part of Canada could not result from either a referendum question that merely focused on the mandate to negotiate without soliciting a direct expression of the will of the people of that province on whether the province should cease to be part of Canada, or B, a referendum question that envisages other possibilities in addition to secession of the province from Canada, such as economic or political arrangement with Canada could be proposed to Quebecers." After some encouraging signs following the election of the Harper Conservative government in 2006, with a political program that advanced an agenda in favor of an open federalism, successive governments paid more attention to national unity and the national interest that in appraising Quebec claims and continued demand for constitutional recognition. As I wrote in a recent book that I was referred to in the introduction, instead of building on the politics of contentment through negotiation, through self-rule, through shared rule, autonomy in various policy fields, internal self-determination, if you prefer, to accommodate Quebec's claim, Ottawa, with the complicity of the 9 Anglophone provinces, has been pursuing a politics of containment by limiting Quebec's power to its simplest expression. Confronted with such attitudes on the part of the central government, it is not surprising that political actors of various stripes will do all they can to remove political obstacles, or else they will be politically disengaged from politics. It is in such a context that the referendum becomes a demos-enabling instrument and a tool of political empowerment of last resort to attenuate political disruption and put an end to ongoing political instability. Being able to hold a constitutional referendum is assuredly the most significant experience in demos construction that one can imagine. It is very deceiving to see majority nation to invest so much efforts at implementing demos constraining action. For example, the impossibility for the Basque or the Catalan to hold a referendum on their constitutional future, limitation of the constitutional option to its extremes, like in the case we saw in Canada post-1999, or in the case of the United Kingdom in 2014. Limits imposed to the democratic principle have to be questioned and challenged. The value of the referendum as a demos-enabling instrument is extremely important for small nations. Since, to quote René Lévesque, the Quebec former premier, or our own Léane Dakari, the right to control its own national destiny is the most fundamental right possessed by a nation, end of quote. Expression of the democratic principle has never been clearly challenged by Ottawa. What has been challenged is the percentage to obtain to satisfy the majority nation and the condition that need to be satisfied. This condition seems to augment exponentially through time, as if a result obtaining an absolute majority was not clear enough. As if question dealing either with renewed federalism, a reform state of autonomies, a proposal based on sovereignty association, or a proposal advancing shared sovereignty could not be clear enough from the point of view of the majority nations. This raises the issue related to the principle of feasibility, goodwill, and future collaboration among the partners in the unfolding political events. So far, Quebec has been able to organize 2 constitutional referendums, respectively on sovereignty association and on sovereignty partnership, the latter corresponding to a Devo max. While the rule had been decided by the Quebec National Assembly alone, Quebec being a founding member of a multinational federal state, it remains that Ottawa and other provinces have attempted to influence the process by investing a lot of money in favor of the no campaign, by developing a strategy reminiscent of the good cop, bad cop image, and by resorting to various initiatives which have been quite questionable with respect to fair play. Nowadays, and following the Clarity Act of 1999, Ottawa wants to dictate the rules of the game by skirting around the 1998 reference case with respect to Quebec's ultimate right to secede. As I mentioned earlier, current day politics confirms a recrudescence, an increase of interest for self-rule in several democratic plurinational settings. Catalonia, Quebec, and Scotland are the three main cases that monopolize international attention in Western democracies. If these three political settings, in those three political settings, political parties wishing to reverse homogenizing trends with respect to language and identity have become increasingly vocal and have been able to mobilize support efficiently. This leads me to the questions, are the circumstances today more conducive to the emergence of new states in democratic settings, particularly in countries where the demos is fragmented or plural? It would be intellectually misleading to seek to provide a final opinion on this subject. It is useful to identify, however, some principles that will make it possible to envisage such a scenario. The first one is the democratic principle. Canada is one of the most established democracies in the Western world, as I mentioned. It would be natural for it to encourage the development of values underlying and strengthening liberal values. It is relevant to point out the American experience, which is a case of emancipation from the mother country and an important precedent in terms of unilateral declaration of independence. However, recourse to unilateral declaration of independence has long been discouraged by the international community in the post-colonized period and in the and I stress here, the post-Soviet Union period. And we could come back to this in the discussion period. I wouldn't want to miss discussion on that. The fact that Quebec has been in a position to hold two referendums with the involvement of the central government on the north side confirms clearly and explicitly that Quebec has the right to self-determination. Here is a brief excerpt of what René Lévesque, the Premier of Quebec, said in 1980 following the first referendum. I quote, "During the recent referendum, the people of Quebec exercised for the first time their right to self-determination. They exercised it democratically and legally. This has been acknowledged as such by the rest of Canada, and the premiers of a number of provinces have taken personal position on this. It has also been recognized by the international community, which has shown a great deal of interest in the event. Clear recognition of this right is the most valuable achievement of the Quebec referendum. The right to control its own national destiny is the foremost right possessed by the Quebec nation." End of quote. Expression of the democratic principle has never been formally challenged by the central government. What was later questioned was the percentage needed to achieve independence and the clarity of the question to be asked to the Quebec constituents. This brings me to the principle of feasibility. It's not all to express oneself, you have also to incarnate it. Following the Quebec second referendum in 1995, which essentially concerns Quebec's right to negotiate and to renegotiate the federal pact, the Supreme Court had the opportunity to give its opinion in the reference case. The Supreme Court identified four underlying principles that were equally important for ensuring just and equitable relation among all political partners in the Federation. Democracy, federalism, constitutionalism and the rule of law together, not to be divorced, and respect for minority rights. Moreover, it is also clearly recognized that there were two national majorities in Canada, one located in Quebec and the other located in the rest of Canada. Paragraph 93 of the reference case contained the following on the Quebec right to secede, and I quote, "So long as Quebec exercises its right while respecting the rights of others, it may propose secession. It may propose secession and seek to achieve it through negotiation. The negotiation process precipitated by a decision of a clear majority of the population in Quebec on a clear question to pursue secession will require the reconciliation of various rights and obligation by the representative of two legitimate majority, namely the clear majority of the population of Quebec and the clear majority of Canada as a whole, whatever that may be. There can be no suggestion that either of these majority trumps the other. A political majority that does not act in accordance with the underlying constitutional principle we have identified puts at risk the legitimacy of the exercise of its rights." End of quote. The court did not clarify all aspects of the debate, but it did provide a framework for managing disputes, and it identified all sides' duty to act responsibly. This brings us to the principle of effectiveness. This is the principle that allows nations seeking recognition and enfranchisement to take in hand, unconstrained by the former encompassing state, the destiny of the national community reformed around recomposed institutions. This can be done in a civilized manner, as in the case of the Velvet Divorce in Czechoslovakia, or in a more tense way, as with Kosovo, as was referred to in the earlier presentation. If there is a clear answer to a clear question, we should expect that in the case of Quebec, the government could proceed to go ahead and establish a revamped set of institutions and a new democratic environment. Getting to my conclusion. In Quebec, since the referendum of 1995, there have been much more energy spent in avoiding the issue of constitutional recognition and judicial and in political empowerment than in displaying moderation and hospitality, or in advancing the principle of substantive equality between Canada's multinational partners. If there is a lesson to be learned from the Quebec II lost constitutional referendum, is that there could be a significant price to pay if a state challenger fails. The stakes are very high, and the majority will seek to make them even higher, with the cost of undermining its status internationally. But since the stakes get higher and higher, minority nations have a fair amount to gain if they were to win, considering that the defeat of their political space will probably be reduced significantly. So this becomes an incentive to vote yes in this case. Self-determination has two dimensions. On the one hand, the process of self-determination has been presented by majority nations as an attempt to disrupt and destabilize economic, political, social, and international relations. On the other hand, self-determination can lead to a process of political, constitutional, and judicial empowerment that can make a concrete difference for nations in quest of a democracy founded on fairness, trust, justice, and dignity. However, and to really conclude, the logic of a referendum in segmented or fragmented polities can be analyzed from four angles. As a zero-sum game in which what is gained by one partner is lost by the other. Could also be viewed as the winner takes it all, the Russian perspective. Third one, the danger to see communities being further estranged and alienated if nothing is done. And here we have seen the Quebec youth almost totally disengaging from Canada's political institution. So it's a secession by stealth. And fourth, an opportunity to make the majority nation aware of the importance of making changes through the implementation of public policies that are better connected with community claims, if you prefer the UK route. And here we have to examine the Smith Commission to appreciate some of that. It's hard to predict which of Quebec, Scotland, Catalonia, Flanders, the Basque Country will be the next state to enter the United Nations. Political will, or perhaps even more the absence of political will, and economic circumstances matter a lot. It is quite possible that emulation has also a role to play. So what is happening in Flanders, what's happening in Quebec, Scotland, the European Union at large, the Basque Country, obviously matters to a significant amount. Finally, and to echo what the Supreme Court of Canada stated in its 1998 reference case, secession is a legal act as much as a political one, to be taken seriously and discussed openly. Any attempt to impede democratic nations to discuss their political and constitutional future seems to be counterproductive and contribute to the disenfranchisement of large segments of population who share a culture, a way of life, a system of meaning, as well as a set of value and a territory. In the end, what is a referendum if not an instrument to achieve peaceful and constitutional change and to enhance democracy? Thank you very much.
Okay, just a brief, Julie, I'll make one brief question and then before, yes. Okay, so just before we ask Julie to make a presentation, a couple of brief questions or comments on your presentation. So what is next in Quebec? In some way, like you were describing all the, kind of the logic of the problem, but if we compare from the Basque Country or Catalonia, you already achieve the possibility to be consulted, and the state recognized that. In socioeconomic terms, Quebec is a very wealthy society, open and connected to the world. So what is the problem? Maybe you have lost. Or the second question will be in terms of majority, because you already have had a couple of referendums and the results were very close. There is a point for those who are advocating for a different type of majority. So, because you could have a yes vote and then in 2 years a similar campaign on having the majority, and you have to make the referendum again. So, what is your view on the necessary majority? And finally, you didn't mention the question of the Indian nations in the discussion. So, Indian nations in Quebec are not supporting the independence of Quebec. So, would Quebec recognize the right to self-determination of the Indian nations if one day we become an independent state?
Well, I will not wait for more questions because it's a full plate here. Let's start with the Aboriginal. That's the toughest question. Obviously, the Aboriginal have major claims to make, and if there is a community, a nation that can stop another nation with respect to the Quebec right to secession, it's the one. If there is one obstacle, political obstacle that exists, it's the question of the Aboriginal nation. It's not the question of the Anglo-Quebecers living in Quebec, because they form part of the Canadian nation, broadly speaking. So it's not the community that can stop the Quebec claims. But Aboriginal do have an incredible claims because they form 1% of the Quebec population. So we have also to be aware of this. But they have there's a human dimension. There is a social human dimension that is obviously connected with this. Now, not as a disclaimer, but if I were an Aboriginal, and if I were supportive the case of independence, if I wanted to advance the case of my nation, I would be much more showing solidarity toward the Quebec community. Why? Because there have been some major pact signed between the Aboriginal and the Quebec government, very, very substantial pact, nation-to-nation agreement that have been taking place. We've seen that in the James Bay Agreement. We've seen that in what we call La Paix des Braves. So it's the two top leaders, the Aboriginal leader and the Quebec Premier, sitting together and trying to come to terms with their differences in obviously trying to bring to each other the best they can. And this has been extremely successful. It's not quite exact to say, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's wrong or false, but it's not quite exact to say that Aboriginal are all opposed to independence. You know, they've been, in fact, within the Francophone, the French-speaker Aboriginal, there's much more support that we can find there. So if we look at the Montagnais, for instance, the Hurons, there could be up to 30% of these people who are currently supporting the nationalist cause. Now, if we look more at the Mohawk or the English speaker, the one that are moving more in the English speaking world, they are showing much less support toward Quebec independence. Okay, so But as I said, it's an extremely important point. But and you have also to come to the fact that the Aboriginal nation in Quebec are recognized constitutionally by the Quebec government, so they have a big claims on the Quebec community as well. The question was about, in fact, the never referendum, if I understood it correctly. Now, if you try it once, you try it a second time, you will try it a third time. So how many times do you need to try it before succeeding? Well, this is a democracy. You know, democracy is about that. Democracy is, do we want to live together? Yes or no? And we sure hope that it's yes. But perhaps it's no. And if there are rules that are imposed on a given community that are not fair, just, that do not allow a community to show itself some dignity, well, then perhaps there is to be a never referendum. And we've been very fortunate because the Canadians have been, in fact, willing to engage into. But you have to remember the foundation of Canada. The foundation of Canada is about two founding people coming together and trying to establish a way of life in North America. Now, we were very negligent because we had denied the same right to the Aboriginal. We, the French Canadian, we, the English Canadian. So we were very improper in our behavior. But the truth of the matter is that we come together as a multinational community. And if we are multinational communities, we have to decide multinationally. It's not the dominant nation that will simply impose itself on the other nation. This is totally unacceptable, as if Quebec has the right to impose its entire will on the Aboriginal nation. This is totally unacceptable. And this is why I'm saying Aboriginal nation is the most important obstacle to the right of Quebec to secede. Okay. So the same thing happens with respect to Quebec. Quebec needs to be accommodated, not just accommodated, empowered fully and as it wants to develop itself, as long as it advances a liberal agenda, as long as it respects the right of other communities, as long as it respects and advances the right of other communities on its territory. Now, obviously, when we compare Quebec and the Sovereignty Association project to the idea of the Plan Ibarache, or when we look at the situation in the autonomous community, obviously there's no comparison that is well, we can make it in terms of degree, but it's a very different situation. I'm talking quite frequently with people in Catalonia, and they were always telling me, if we were to have what you guys have, well, it's a very different situation, and it is not a desirable situation, the way that it is now, but it's not because Quebec has that we say, well, this is not just, their claims, no, they should stop asking because they have more than we do, and we wish we had what they had. Well, you should use that as an element of emulation. And this is why I was telling, again, my Catalan friend, I said, you should have an international commission accompanying you in the process much more than what you've done before. You should also strike a much more link of solidarity with the Basque people. You know, when you had the Plan Ibarache here, why were you not showing more solidarity toward the Basque people? And then they will have helped you out in this, what's just happening to you now. So this idea of cross-solidarity is essential. If the historical nation that exists in this country are not capable of showing solidarity, we or you are in trouble. That's where it starts. And the fact that the Constitution does not allow you to show solidarity is something that is abysmal. This is not tolerable. This is something that has to be condemned and criticized very, very severely. So obviously we are in a position that is better, but you have to look at it as a way by which you can improve your condition. You can refer to, this is an interesting case here, and this is what we want to get for our people, based on democratic principle, not on might, the power, might that power, power that might, and not on the strength of the central state. Okay, what's next? I wish I knew. What's next? we still, well, Canadian, here I'm bringing all of them together. I mean, me as a Canadian as well, I think it's a quite decent community. And this is why we're still together, because it's a decent community. It plays with some of the roads at the margin, and this is very, very disturbing. But at the same time, it is a decent community that allows discussion, debates, and exchanges. And I think here, this is why I'm saying this is a country that is well established. It's a democracy that is well established. But in terms of its democratic practices, it's one of the most advanced countries in the world. Okay, but it doesn't mean that it's perfect. Okay, and from a francophone position, from a Quebec position, we obviously find ourselves at times at we find a narrow place within the Canadian Federation, but it's a bit normal because it's the only francophone province out of 10. We used to be one of two nations imagining the future together, and then suddenly you have not 4 member states, but 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And who knows, with the Aboriginal up north, perhaps we will have 10, 11. So that means we then become not 1 or 2 people, but 1 out of 10, 11, 12 member states. And as a result, it's difficult to, we've lost in that sense our veto power on constitutional reform, while we were one of the 2 key components to the federation. And based on that, this is one of the strongest base from which Quebec can claim its right to secede, because it is one of the founding nations, as in the case, I would say, of other situations where you have historic nation and other nations which pretend to be historic.
Okay. Well, I think there will be plenty of questions afterwards, but Julia, Mercedes.
Egiten. He salido, sin más. La pantalla osoa, hemendik egingo dut.
Jarri, a ver cómo presentar. Listo.
Hola. Baiez?
Baiez?
Entzute zait? Bai. Euskeraz egingo dut nik nire ponentzia. Eta enaiz gehiegi luzatuko. Ze ezagutzen hauzu eta aprobetxatu behar dugu kanpoko jendia etorri dela. Bueno, itzen behar dut demokrazia eta subirautzari buruz edo erabakia eta ahalmena. Orduan, ikusten dezuten moduan, nire interbentzioa askoz ere politikoagoa izango da edo politologikoagoa. Eta, bueno, Gagnonek esan duen moduan, Kanadako Auzitegi Gorenak horrela dio, sezesioa ekintza legala izateaz gain, ekintza politikoa delako. Eta nire helburua litzateke hain zuzen ere hori hartzea, hau da, politikotasun hori, eta pixkat azaltzea nola erlazionatzen den dimentsio politikoa, edo dimentsio politiko horrek ze esan nahi duen, eta nola erlazionatzen den demokrazia eta erabakiarekin, ahalmenarekin eta burujabetzarekin. Eta zentzu horretan ere, saiatuko naiz erantzuten ez oso bere osotasunean, baina bai parte batean Graham Averyk galdetu duen hori eta da zer da independentzia. Orduan, egia esan nire ikuspegia Europar Batasunarekiko ia Grahamenen ikuspegiaren kontrakoa da zenbait gaietan, ez guztietan. Europar Batasunak demokrazia indartuko zuela esan zuten, edo esan zen, hori egingo zuela gobernantza mekanismoen bidez, hau da gobernuan hitzaren edo gobernu mailak biderkatzen egingo zuela herritarren ahalduntze hori, bai? Europar Batasunaren egitura edo arkitektura horretan oinarrituta egon behartzela, hain zuzen ere herria edo herri subirautza esango genuke indartzeko, irmotzeko. Gure ikuspuntutik, berez, Europan ez da herri subirautza demokratizatu, ez da irmotu erez, privatizatu eginda. eta herritarrak ahaldundu behar zituzten gobernantza mekanismoak biderrikatu dira, bai, baina ez dira demokratizatu. Orduan, zentzu horretan, globalizazioak eta Europar batasunak autoritate politikoaren eta erabaki publikoaren privatizazioan datza edo privatizazioa ekarri dute. Gobernantza mekanismoek eta gobernu maila anitzek beraz ez dute oraingoz soberania edo subirautza demokratizatu. Ez dutelako autoritatea edo herritarren autoritate eta erabaki politikoa ziurtatu edo bermatu. Guztiz alderantziz ikusi dugun bezala privatizatu egin dute. Eta, bueno, zer esan nahi du zehazki honek, zer esan nahi du privatizatzea soberania edo demokrazia? Ba, herritarren eskaerak gauzatzeko eta herritarrak gobernatze prozesuan barneratzeko behar den ahalmen politikoa privatizatu dela, azken hamarkadetan. Eta orduan, egia da, noski Europar batasuna badela ere, barkatu, ez bakarrik globalizazioaren, baizik eta demokratizazioaren ondorio, eta orduan noski horrek eduki ditu ondorio desberdinak, batzuetan kontrajarriak, eta zentzu horretan, biak bai globalizazioa nola demokratizazioa lotu ditzazkegu soberania aldarriekin, bai? Erabaki eskubidearekin eta sezessioarekin. Hau da, esan nahi dut, eman dela bai adibidez uraren edo energiaren privatizazioa, baina baita ere eman da hainbat estatutan gutxieneko errenta. Esan nahi dut, eremu batzuetan egonda privatizazio bat, eremu gehienetan orain dagoeneko, baina zenbait eremutan demokratizazio bat ere eman dela, orain desdemokratizazio batean egon arren. Orduan, herri subirautza gauzatzeko, zergatik dijo hau? Herri subirautza gauzatzeko mekanismoak huts egiten dutenean gertatzen da hau, hau da sortzen dira soberania eskaerak, burujabetza eskaerak, eta subirautza eskaerak botere, autoritate eta erabaki publikoa berreskuratzeko eskaerak dira. Nik terminologia hori erabiliko nuke. Eta beraz, demokraziaren privatizazioa ekiditeko eskaerak dira. Eta nola egiten da, lehen esan duguna, ez pixka sakontzearen, nola gertatzen da demokraziaren privatizazio hau, ez? Lehen esan bezala, ahalmen politikoaren privatizazioaren bidez. Eta nola egin dute hori, ez da zergatik horrela egin behar, baina nola gertatu da gobernantza mekanismo horiek biderkatuz, eta gobernantza mekanismo horiek erabaki publikotik, erabaki publiko lotesletik, vinkulantetik at kokatuz. Horrela egiten da privatizazio prozesu hori, ahalmen politikoaren privatizazioa. Orduan, herriaren botere eta autoritate politikoa, hau da, herri subirautzaren privatizazioa, horregatik iruditzen zait garrantzitsua erlazionatzea herri boterea eta autoritate politikoa subirautzaren kontzeptuarekin. Herri subirautzaren kontzeptuarekin. Eta nola egiten da, privatizazio hori, bain zuzen ere, erabaki politikoak, eta horien gauzatzea esku pribatuetan utziz. Hau da, adibidez, adituen eskuetan utziz. Lehesan dugun bezala, gainera, boterea privatizatzen dezunean, ezagutza privatizatzen da, eta beraz ongizatea privatizatzen da. Orduan, hemen garrantzitsuena edo azpimarratu nahiko nukena da kontzeptu hauek, orain jorratuko ditugu gehiago, baina botere publikoaren, autoritate politikoaren eta erabaki politikoaren privatizazio hori dagoela erlazioan subirautzarekin eta demokrazioarekin edo barkatu desdemokratizazio prozesu honekin. Eta orduan, sartuko geha pixkat gehiago, nahiko nuke, subirautzaren kontzeptu horretan pixkat sakondu. Badakizue ezagunenetakoa subirautza kontuetan dala Hinsley, izeneko anglosajoi bat, historialaria zen, eta gaur egun egiten diren subirautzan gaineko lan gehienak bera dute oinarri. Eta, bueno, zer da subirautza? Ba, estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazio politikoa. Ez da gehiegi esatea, baina bada printzipio bat, bada hasiera bat. Bai, estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazioarena azpimarratu behar da, erlazioa. Orduan, galderak, edo guri interesatzen zaizkigun galderak, ba, dira, zeintzuk dira gaur subirautza demokratikoa garatzeko herri batek behar dituen baldintzak. Ze ez dira berdinak 19. mendean edo 20. mendean, noski 19. mendean demokrazia bendikan ez zen existitzen, baina esan nahetena da subirautzaren baldintzak eta are gehiago subirautza demokratikoa zari geranean aldatzen doazela eta orduan ikuspuntua jarri behar dela edo analisia egin behar dela baldintza horien inguruan. Bai? Ze baldintza behar ditu subirautza demokratikoak existitzeko, garatzeko. Are gehiago, berdinak aldira baldintza horiek beren burua estatu bezala gobernatzen dutenen eta beren burua estatu bezala gobernatzen ez dutenen artean, baldintzak berdinak dira, baldintza politikoak, sozioekonomikoak, eta bar. Edo bestera batera esan da, nola gauzatu soberania zure burua estatu bezala gobernatu ezean, 21. mendean, Europar Batasunean. Hori da, printzipioz, gure kontekstua. Orduan, errepaso bat egitearren, esan dut Europan eta oroar mendebaldean, Kanada barne, estatu batuak barne. Soberautza privatizatzen baldin bada, edo privatizatu baldin bada, ez demokratizatu, eta gobernantza mekanismoak biderkatu baldin badira, ez demokratizatu, subirania edo burujabetza eskariak autoritate eta erabaki publikoa privatizatzearen ondorio dira. Autoritate eta erabaki publikoa. Eta subirautza estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazioa edo zatiketa zehatz bat baldin bada, aldatzen doana, historian zehar, eskuartean ditugun sezesio eta burujabetza prozesuek erlazio honek, estatuaren eta komunitatearen erlazio horrek, sortzen dituen arazoen ondorioa da. Estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazio gatazkatsu hori da arazoa gaur. Ez bakarrik Euskal Herrian, ez bakarrik Katalunian, Europa Batasun osoan. Orduan, esan nahi da zentratuta gaude hemen estaturik gabeko nazioetan, baina 15 bat edo hainbat mugimendu sozial eta ere dira erlazio honen edo krisi honen ondorio, komunitatearen eta estatuaren arteko erlazio horren ondorio eta beraz erlazio horri subirautza deitzen zaio. Horregatik errepikatzen dut hau, gero bueltatuko naiz, baina tesietako bat nahiko indarrean dagoena da aro post-soberano batean sartzen ari gerala eta garai post-nazional batean eta guzti hori. Ni guztiz kontragoa pentsatzen dut eta pixkat argumentua hortikan jungo da. Orduan, herritarren botere politikoaren galeraren ondorio dira nire ikuspuntutik sezesio eskaerak eta erabakitzeko eskubidearen ingurueko eskaerak. Eta zergatik lotzen dut nik horrekin? Subirautza, lehen esan dut, autogobernurako behar den ahalmen politikoa delako. Subirautzaren kontzeptua horregatik da horren garrantzitsua, autogobernurako behar den ahalmen politikoa delako, eta ez dago demokratizaziorik autogobernurik gabe. Horregatik demokratizazio aro batean, ezin da esan, hain zuzen ere post-soberania aro badela, guztiz kontrakoa baita. Arazoa da nola birpentsatu edo zein kasutan soberania edo subirautza kontzeptua, eta nola demokratizatu. Ze azken finean hori da, herri subirautza da demokraziaren printzipioaren atzean dagoena, eta ez daukagu beste printzipiorik. Hori da daukaguna, ez dago besterik. Orduan, orain pasako naiz erlazenatzea subirautza ahalmen politikoarekin, hobeto, eta demokratizazioarekin edo demokraziarekin. Esan dut, soberaniaren printzipioak estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko zatiketa edo erlazio zehatz bati egiten diola erreferentzia. Estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazioa aldatzen den bakoitzean, horregatik berpentsatu behar da erlazio hori eta kontzeptu hori. Komunitate politikoen konplexutasuna handitu eginda azken hamarkadetan, alde batetik ongizate estatuaren zabalkuntzarekin. Esan nahi da, demokratizazioaren ondorioz, lehen esan deten bezala, komunitate politikoak geroz eta integratuagoak daude. Hain zuzen ere, estatuen funtzioak biderkatu direlako azken hamarkadetan. Baina konplexutasun berri honek, hain zuzen ere, ez du nire iritziz, lehen esan deten bezala indarrean dagoen diskurtsoa berresten. Bai, estatuak desagertzen ari direla, nazio-estatuak edo nazioak ere desagertzen ari direla eta garai post-soberano horretan sartzen ari gerala. Zergatik, konplexutasun honek, inoiz baino beharrezkoagoa bilakatzen duelako herri subirautzaren kontzeptua, herri subirautzarena, eta ez estatu. Ze azken finean gertatu dana subirautzarekin da legelariak hartu dutela, gertatzen den bezala sezesioarekin eta hainbat fenomeno politikoekin, eta egiten dute birkontzeptualizazio bat, eta azten dute ekintza politikoak direla, kontzeptu politikoa direla originalki. Beraiek sartzen dituzte zuzenbidearen arloan, baina aztuta nondik datozen. Orduan, birkontzeptualizazioa bai egin politikaren arloan, hau da, politologiaren arloan, inkluso praktika politikotik, bai egin zuzenbidetik, argi eduki behar da kontzeptu hauek, subirautzaren kontzeptua, ez dela kontzeptu legal bat. Nahiz eta gero legala bilakatu, kontzeptu politikoa dira. Eta netzako hori garrantzitsua da, horrelako prozesuetan, azken finean, legelariek hartzen dute hitza, eta dana kokatzen dugu, ez, konstituzioaren edo marko horretan, ez? Eta, bueno, nik uste horrekin kontu zibili bar dela, ze tramparen parte bat litzateke askotan, ez? Orduan, hor esaten dut, funtzioa, subirautzaren funtzio hori da aztertu behar dena, zergatik komunitatearen eta estatuaren arteko erlazioa artikulatzen duelako. Lehen esan dut, ez daukagu beste kontzepturik komunitatearen eta estatuaren arteko erlazio hori artikulatzeko. Eta zergatik da hori bere funtzioa, zer egiten du, zerra ahalbidetzen du. Ahalbidetzen du bai estatua, bai komunitatea gobernatuak izan daitezen, biek gobernatu dezaten elkarrekin desberdinak izan arren. Ze estatu modernoaren eta gizarte modernoaren ezaugarria da komunitatea eta estatua desberdinak direla. Orduan, subirautzaren kontzeptuak entzen baldin badegu, joan gaitezke 3000 urte atzera, esan nahi eta asmatu beharko dugu beste komunitate kontzeptu bat eta beste estatuaren kontzeptu bat, nun komunitatea eta estatua berdinak liratekeen. Desberdinak direnean, subirautzak artikulatu behar du hori. Askotan, hau ikasi dugu institutoan, herri subirautza transferitzen da demokraziatan, legegilearen bidez, eta estatu subirautza bihurtzen da. Estatu soberania. Baina estatu soberania hori datorren lekutik. Estatu soberania ez zindu bere oinarria bere sobiranian eduki. Estatu soberania dauka bere oinarria beti herriaren subirautzan. Noski, aro demokratikoetan ari bagea hitz egiten eta ez estatu absolutisten garaian. Orduan, zentzu horretan, zergatik da ezinbestekoa, demokratizazioak eskatzen duelako, hain zuzen ere, demokratizazioa da prozesu bat. Prozesu bat, zeinaren bidez, herritarrak gobernatze prozesuan, gobernaketan, sistemaren gobernaketan barneratzen diren. Eta hori lortzen da, herritarrai baliabide eta aukera berdinak emanez edo aukera berdinak dituztela ziurtatuz. Beraz, demokratizazioa dinamikoa da, prozesu bat da, berdinketarantz edo barneraketaruntz doan prozesu gatazkatsu hori. Horrek esan nahi du, demokratizazioa da estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazio jakin bat. Hau da, demokratizazioa gertatzen da, komunitatearen eta estatu horren erlazioak zenbait ezaugarri lortzen dituenean. Lortzen da, subirautzaren demokratizazioa esango genuke. Bi elementu daude hor demokratizazioa gertatzeko. Estatu ahalmena behar da, eta orduan estatu ahalmenaren eta gizarte mobilizazio horren arteko elkarrekintzaren ondorioa litzateke demokratizazioa. Hau da, demokraziak behar ditu bi elementu horiek. Estatu ahalmena batetik, estatuak herritarrak kontrolatzeko, edo nahi bada herritarren baliabideak, erlazioak eta abar kontrolatzeko, hori da ogasuna eta hori da eskola publikoa eta abar, eta B, gizarte mobilizazioa, mobilizazio maila. Hartu behar da kontuan, hau da, herritarrak antolatzeko eta protestarako duten ahalmena bere eskakizunak hain zuzen ere gobernatze prozesuan sartzeko. Hor gertatzen da demokratizazioa, herriaren eskaera horiek gobernaketa prozesuan sartzen direnean demokratizatzen da estatu bat. Ez bakarrik estatuak, hau da, estatu autoritario bat izango litzateke ahalmena handiko estatu bat, baina ez dituenak bere herritarren eskaerak gobernatze prozesuan sartzen. Estatu demokratiko bat izango litzateke estatu bat, non estatu ahalmena handia duen, ere kontrolatzeko bere herritarrak ekoizten dutena eta abar, baina noski ahalmena duena ere eskaerak, herritarren eskaera horiek gauzatzeko. aldi berean. Bai? Hau da, ahalmen guzti hori erabiltzeko kapaz denean herritarren eskaerak gauzatzeko. Eta hori da demokratizazioa, eta hain zuzen ere herritarren eskaerak gauzatzea edo gobernatzea hori da herri subirautza. Hori da subirautza, deitzen dana, deitzen deguna. Orduan, zentzu horretan dinamika honen bidez, bilakatzen da herri bat, nazio bat, edo komunitate bat, demos batean. Demos, komentatu duen bezala, Gagnonek, eta horrela bilakatzen da ere sistema politiko bat, autoritarioa izan edo dana dalakoa, sistema demokratiko batean. Bai? A eta B kontuan harturik. Hau da, horrela lortzen da, herri burujabetza gauzatzeko behar den ahalmen politikoa. Zezin deguna ahaztu da, eta askotan ahazten da, herri subirautzak baliabideak behar dituela. Ez ditu bakarrik behar herritarren borondatea. Subiraua izateko, baliabideak behar ditu, ahalmena. Ahalmena herritarren eskaerak gauzatzeko. Ze hori da, askotan, estatu demokratikoen arazo bat. Ez dutela ahalmenik, hain zuzen ere, herriaren eskakizunak gauzatzeko. Eskakizunak, herrian eskakizunak esan nahi da, eskola publikotik hasi, osasungintza, azpiegiturak eta guzti hori esan nahi da. Orduan, egia da horretik esaten nuen, burujabetza mota asko dagoela, baina burujabetza demokratikoa da interesatzen zaiguena zentzu honetan, 20. mende hasiera honetan, eta Europar Batasunaren barnean. Eta burujabetza demokratikoa orduan nola definitu daiteke? Komunitate batek bere erabakiak gauzatzeko duen ahalmen politikoa. Eta hau da interesatzen zaiguna. Erabaki horien artean oinarrizkoena da komunitatearen biziraupena. Denboran eta espazioan zehar. Eta hori ezin dugu ahaztu, ze batzutan azten dugu, hemen ari gea askotan komunitateen biziraupenaz hitz egiten. Orduan, biziraupen demokratikoak ere, burujabetza demokratikoak bezala, biziraupen demokratikoak baldintza batzuk ditu. Ez horiek dira, hein handi batean, aztertu behar direnak, batez ere jakiteko nola lortu burujabetza demokratikoa. Eta zergatik ditu subirautza demokratikoak edo biziraupen demokratikoak nahi bada baldintza batzuk, demokrazia dominazio politiko zehatz bat delako, berezko arauak eta berezko egiturak dauzka, autoritate, eskubide eta lurralde mota bereizituak. Politika publiko erregular eta amankomunen bidez eratzen dira demosak edo gizarte demokratikoak, erakunde eta beraz praktika zehatz batzuen bidez. Horregatik, esaten nuen lehen, post-soberania hitz egiten dela, baina estatu modernoa eta batez ere ongizate estatua, estatu demokratikoak, herriaren gobernuan datza. Eta herriak gobernatua izatearen eta herriak gobernatzearen demokrazia. Arteko desberdintasuna subirautzaren subjektuan eta honen gauzatzean datza. Eta ez subirautzaren existentzian edo desagerpenean. Baizik eta zein da subirautza horren subjektua. Hori da garrantzitsuena. Gobernu eta gobernugintza demokratikoa. Esan bezala, disiplina eta seguritate mekanismoetan oinarritzen da. Helburua badakizue, horrela esaten da, formalki, ongizate estandarizatua eta baliabideen sozialak, ekonomikoak, giza baliabideen erabilera eragingarria duela gobernugintza demokratikoak. Hau da, gobernugintza demokratikoak ahalmen politiko ikaragarria behar du, eta batez ere ahalmen politiko handiko erakundeak behar ditu. Esan bezala, demokrazia ez talako, orain dela 3 mende zeuden estatu absolutisten bezalako erregimenak, hau da beste helburu batzuk ditu, horien artean esan bezala populazioa gobernatzea. Orain dela 3 mendeko estatuen helburua etzen populazioa gobernatzea. Pixkanak hasiko dira, orain dela 2 mende populazioa gobernatzen, baina ordura arte ez. Populazioa gobernatzearena kontzeptu hori garrantzitsua da, ze askotan imaginatzen dugu estatuek, edo erregeek eta abar beti beren populazioa gobernatu dutela, baina ez da ala, bai? Zu jaiotzen zinan, bizitzen zinan, erreproduzitzen zinan eta hil egiten zinan, eta estatuak ez zizun gobernatzen. Altzenuen bezala bizirauten zenuen. Estatuak gure ongizatea edo gure gobernua kontuan hartzearena nahiko berria da, bai? Baina dela 2 mende edo hasten da eragingarrian hori martxan jartzen eta, bueno, iritsi da honeaino eta hemen gaude. Zena, oso pixkanaka dijoan prozesu bada, bai? Estatuaren eta komunitate horren arteko erlazio arduratsu hori sortzearena, eta hain zuzen ere hori eginda subirautzaren kontzeptuaren bidez, herri subirautzaren kontzeptuaren bidez. Horregatik iruditzen zait oso arriskutsua postsoberaniaz eta hitz egitea, bai? Orduan, gobernagintza demokratikoa hori da, eta herri soberanian helburua zein izan da beti herri subirautza horren kontzeptua, baita ere Sillesek 1700ean Frantzian iraultzan bere helburua berdina zen, naiz eta beste garai bazen, zein da hor helburua herri soberaniaren helburua, herria birsortuko dela ziurtatu, herriak erabaki bezala. Hori da diferentzia. Ez da bakarrik herria birsortu, baizik eta burujatza demokratiko batean herria birsortu, biziraun, behar du herriak erabaki bezala. Bai? Kasu honetan, demokratikoki. Orduan, desdemokratizazio prozesu batean gaudela baieztatzeko, komunitateek beren erabaki politikoak gauzatzeko duten ahalmen politikoa da aztertu beharko litzatekeena. Nire ikuspuntuntik, ez horren beste historiaren garapena, edo herri batek dauzkan habilidadeak, edo historia kultural, edo kultura barkatu politiko eta ekonomikoa, ez da eskubide historikoak edo unibertsalak. Baizik eta erabaki politikoak hartzeko komunitate edo herri horrek duen, galdu duen, edo lor dezakeen ahalmen politikoa. Horregatik uste dela ezin bestekoa ahalmen politikoaren kontzeptua. Komunitate horrek duen subirautza alegia da aztertu behar dena. Ulertzeko esan nahi dut, sezesio eskaerak edo erabakitzeko eskubidea eta abar. Eta esan bezala, subirautza ez da gauza bat, hori errepikatu behar da, ze beti gauza bat bezala imaginatzen da, boterea bezala, eta ez da gauza bat, erlazio bada, subirautza erlazio bada. Eta horregatik esaten nuen erlazio horren konplexutasuna eta bilakaera aztertu behar dela independentzia prozesuak ulertzeko. Orduan, estatuaren eta komunitatearen arteko erlazio hori aldatzen denean, burujabetza eskaerak erlazio horren aldaketarekin erlazionatu behar dira. Eta hori ez da egiten ari. Esan nahi noski bai, Eskozian, Katalunian eta abar bai, baina akademian eta ofizialak diren diskurtsoetan edo indarrean daudenak edo esango genuke diru gehien dituzten diskurtsoak ez dute hori esaten. Bai, diskurtsoa da oso bestelakoa. Eta, bueno, horregatik esaten nun, pixkat erlazionatzen baldin badugu ahalmen politikoa eta demokrazia segituan ikusten da garbi demokraziak herri subirautza behar dula, bai? Beraz, soberania garai bat ez dakigu oso ondo ze esango lukeen, edo zer esan nahi duen, ezta? Are gutxiago, oraingoz behintzat, zer esan nahi duen garai postnazionala. Ze hemen gainera sasen ekarriko dut gure artera naziotasuna uste aldatu behar dela ja naziotasunaren kontzeptua aldatzen ari da, noski azkan urteetan, baina baita ere berriz ere Eskozian egiten ari dan lanari esker, Quebecen egindan lanari esker, bai, kontzeptu hori aldatzen ari da, baina sasenek dioen moduan hori naziotasuna ez da soilik identitate bat. Batez ere ahalmen politikoa da naziotasuna. Naziotasun egitura, berak deitzen du the structure national. Eta naziotasun egituratu hau, identitate politiko subiranua izateaz gain, ahalmena da, ahalmena. Herria eta estatua elkarrekin mantentzen dituen ahalmena, ahalmen politikoa. Elkarrekin mantentze hori, komunitatea eta estatua, eskubide, autoritate eta lurraldearen bidez egiten da. Baina erlazio hori, elkarrekin mantentze hori, aldatzen doanez eskubide, autoritate eta lurralde mihiztaketa ere aldatuz doa, eta mihiztaketa berriak sortuz. Horregatik lehen esan dugu demosena, ez eta nola adibidez paises katalanez guztiak ez daude prozesu independentistan, Katalunia dago, Euskal Herrian ere hemen lurraldetasunarekin lotzen ere, nazio guztiak esango genuke ez du subirautza eskaera hori berresten, hau da, diferentziak daude nazio historikoetan, ez, gertatu diren prozesu hauek eta gero, demokratizazio eta globalizazio prozesu hauek eta gero, ez, nun nazio historiko horien parte batzuetan bai ematen da subirautza eskaera eta beste parte batzuetan ez. dan ematen, baina hori ere da, eta hori ere onartu behar da, eta hori ere aztertu behar da, eta hori da, hain zuzen ere, hori azken 50 urtetan egon den demokratizazioaren eta privatizazio horren ondorioa. Bai? Eta noski, segun eta ze estatu erakunde zenituen edo ez. Hori ere garrantzitsua da. Orduan, naziotasun ez egituratuen partetik, naziotasun ez egituratuak, gustatzen zait izena, hori da estaturik ez duten nazioak, egitura soberan horik ez dutenen aldetik datoz, hain zuzen ere horregatik subirautza eskaerak. Ez hori da ikusi behar dena. Hau da, subirautza eskaerak datoz subirautza ez dutenen horietetatik. Hori oso erraz ulertu daiteke, ez? Egia da gero diskurtso ofizialetan hori ahaztu egiten dela, baina printzipioz oso intuitiboa da, ez? Subirautza nork eskatzen du, ba, ez duenak. Hor ez dago teoria handirik egiterik. Orduan, naziotasun egituratua edo estatua duten nazioek bakarrik. Osea, zergatik gertatzen da barkatu naziotasun egituratua ez dutenen eskaera hori. Ze ikusten dute naziotasun egituratua, hau da, estatua dutenek aukeratu dezaketela nola bizi iraun, nola birsortu. Bai? Eta aldiz ez dutenak beren naziotasuna egituratua ez daukate almen hori erabakitzeko nola birsortu. Bai, nola birsortu denboran zehar, berriz ere, eta espazioan zehar. Bai? Orduan, berriz azpimarratuko dut, subirautza demokratikoa, komunitate batek beren erabaki politikoen arabera duen bizirauteko ahalmen politikoa litzateke. Hau da, fijatzen bazeate, lehen definizioa egin deten horren gaineko zabalpen bat, garapen txiki bat. Bai? Subirautza demokratikoa da komunitate politiko batek bere erabaki politikoen arabera duen bizirauteko ahalmen politiko hori. Hemen dituzute erlazionatutak ahalmen politikoa, erabakia, subirautza eta demokrazia. Erlazionatuak horrela, era oso jakin batean, eta iruditzen zait ezinbestekoa, gaina erlazioa hau, ez? Bakoitzak erlaziona ezala nahi duen moduan, baina erlazioa bai dala interesgarria egitea, zer erlazioa hor dago. Subirautza edo burujabetza ezin da gauzatu, erakunde multzorik gabe, hau da, ahalmen politikorik gabe, edo ahalmen politikori ez duten erakundeetatik. Herritarrek sortzen dituzte baliabidetan esku hartzeko ahalmena izan behar bai dituzte erakunde horiek, eta herri mobilizatuaren eskakizunak aldi berean gauzatzeko ahalmena izango behar dituzte barkatu erakunde horiek. Beraz, hemen igual pixkat hola geratu dana da, zer arraio da ahalmen politikoa? Ahalmen politikoa errealitate politikoa sortzeko gaitasuna da. Eta errealitate politikoa dira, errealitate politikoak eta sozialak. Dira herriak, dira nazioak, dira estatuak, bai gure mundu guztia, izaki simbolikoak gehan enean, errealitate simbolikoa sortzen dugu, eta errealitate simbolikoak dira guzti hauek. Errealitate politikoak, errealitate sozioekonomikoak, eta abar. Eta errealitate politikoiek sortzeko eta berriz diot, bir sortzeko, dala hori garrantzitsuena, hau da, bizirauteko, bir sortzeko, errealitate politiko zenbait, zehatz batzuk, bir sortzeko ahalmena eduki behar duzu. Eta horregatik ikusten dugu, ze zailtasun dauzkagu, iparraldean adibidez, konparatzen badegu, hegoaldean dauden erakunde horiekin. Nola, geroz eta erakunde gutxiago eduki, edo ahulagoak askoz ere zailagoa da zure herriaren bir sorketa hori egitea. Ez daukazu hezkuntza publikorik, ez daukazu osasungintzarik, ez daukazu ogasun propiorik eta abar, bai? Askoz ere zailagoa da komunitate horren biziraupena bermatzea erakunderik eta berez ahalmen politikorik gabe. Ondorioetara iristen ari naiz. Eta, esan ditut, baina pixkat biltzearren. Bere burua estatu edo naziotasun egituratu bezala gobernatu ezin duen komunitateak desdemokratizazio prozesu batean sartzen da. Altzera, bueltarik ez duena bere burua egituratu ezean. Horre egituraren kontzeptua da garrantzitsuena, egituraketarena. Horregatik erakundeena, horregatik ahalmen politikoarena. Honek esan nahi du elkarrekin doazela demokrazia subirautza, ahalmena eta erabakia. Soberaniaren dimentsio objetikorik gabe esan nahi da, dimentsio objektiboa da egituratutako, objektibatutako dimentsioa erakundetutakoan, badezue, hori da dimentsio objektiboa. Soberaniaren dimentsio objektiborik gabe, eta beraz, dimentsio horrek erakunde horiek ematen dizkizuna ahalmen politikorik gabe, ez dago birsortze dinamikarik. birsortze dinamika gogoratu estatuaren eta herri mobilizatuaren edo eskakizunak egiten dituen herriaren artean. Bale, dinamika hori ez dago, baliabideak ez badituzu, ahalmena ez badezu. Eta estatuak gauzatzen duen herriaren eta batez ere herritarren birsortze egituratu hori, ze birsortze egituratuaz ari gea, hori da denboran zehar irauteko eta daukagun kontekstuetan Europar Batasunean estatu ez inguratuta herritarren birsortze egituratua lortu ezean, komunitate politikoa desagertzen da epe luzera. Eta orduan hemen nik nahi nituzke ekarri, bezakit aurkituko dituan berriz, galderak, baina gogoratzen bazeate lehen egin ditudan galderak, pixkat hoietara bueltatu zau esan eta gero, ez? Orduan, zeintzuk dira gaur subirautza demokratikoa gauzatzeko herri batek behar dituen baldintzak. Hori izango litzateke, ez dut erantzungo, hori izango litzateke, erantzun garria eta erantzuteko galdera bat, eta horrek, noski, erantzun horrek analisia eta azterketa behar du. Beste bat, lehen esan bezala, nola gauzatu subirautza hori estaturik izan ezean, hau da, naziotasun egituratua izan ezean. Esan botatzen ditu galdera hauek, ze batzutan badirudi badagoela alternatiba bat estatua eukitzeari, horregatik botatzen ditu galdera hauek. Ze igual norbaitek, erantzun alternatiboa dauzka. Eta gero, nuke itxi nahi, esan gabe pixkat, komentatu gabe pixkat, kosoberaniaren edo soberania partekatuaren kontzeptu hau, oso modan dagoena, gainera askotan ere, edo postsoberania edo kosoberania, bat edo bestea, normalean. Orduan, oso egia esan oso kontzeptu imaginatiboa da, edo oso kontzeptu interesgarria. Hau da, joko handia ematen duen kontzeptua, eta bai egia dela intuitiboki dirudiela subirautzaren kontzeptua demokratizatzen duela, bezala, soberania horrek. Arazoa zein da? Arazoa da, hitz egiten ari direla kosoberaniaz, Europar Batasunean, inkluso Espainiar estatuan, baina soberania partekatzeko soberania eduki behar da. Eta hori da daukagun arazoa. Europan Batasunan nazioek ez dutela soberaniarik, orduan nola partekatuko dute soberania. Hori da galdera. Nola partekatzen da ez daukazun zerbait. Lehenengo eduki beharko litzateke. Orduan, juna aurretiko soberania mekanismoi buruz hitz egiteko, ikusteko nola demokratizatu estatuak, ikusi beharko da, berez, nola banatu soberania hori herritarren artean, eta gero herritarrek behin ahaldunduak daudela, orduan egin arkitektura hori, ikusteko nola transferitzen dugun herri subirautza hori gobernu maila guztietatik pasata iritsi arte edo estatura edo Europar Batasunera, hau da, alderantzizko bidea izango litzateke. Eta hain zuzen ere, gainera, ez du kosoberaniaren kontzeptuak oraingoz ez du gehiegirako eman, edo, desde luego, ez du gehiegi aholdundu herritarra, zergatik, subirautzaren kontzeptuarekin arazoa dagoelako, eta subirautzaren transferentziarekin gaur egungo estatuetan arazoa dagoelako, eta ez da arazo hori ikutu nahi. Eta gertatzen ari dana da, eta estatu Espainiarrean gertatu dana, de hecho, bai Katalunian daukagun egoerakin, bai Euskal Herrian izan da, estatu hori ez dela gai izan, ez katalanak asimilatzeko eta euskaldunak asimilatzeko, baina ez da gai izan ere ez, haien subirautza estatura transferitzeko. Ezin izan du, katalandar herritarren edo euskal herritarren subirautza hori estatura ekarri. Ez da egon transferentziarik. Ez da herri subirautzaren transferentziarik ez da egon. Behar bada Espainiar nazioaren transferentzia, herri transferentzia hori egon da eina handiago batean, eta egon da eina handiago batean. Baina ikusten baduzue arazoa beti da berdina, hau da, arazoa izan da, Espainia ez dela gai izan, edo nahi ez duelako izan, hori berdin zaigu momentu honetan, transferentzia hori egitea. Bai, hau da, katalanak eta euskaldunak estatu bezala ere gobernatu ahal izatea. Hori izango litzateke herri subirautzaren transferentzia hori. Hori ez da gertatu. Eta gainera, Eskozian, edo Britainia handian, hori lortu dute eina handi batean, baina ez guztiz. Eta gainera, Eskoziarrak hori da, esaten dutena, hain zuzen ere. Eta horregatik egin dute referendum bat oraingoan, eta ez dituzte kompetentzia gehiago eskatu. Ze kompetentziak edukitzea eta soberautza edukitzea ez da berdina. Ez da inolaz ere berdina. Eta hemen utziko dut.
Eskerrik asko. Bueno, galdera labur bat eta gero zabalduko dugu tartea hori beste galderak edo komentarioak. Zure marko teoriko erabilita, prozesuak bai Katalunian eta Euskal Herrian nahiko similarrak izango lirateke. baina gero praktikan oso egoera ezberdinetan gauz, bai Katalunian eta bai Euskadi momentu honetan. Gizartearen erantzuna, gizartearen parte hartzea oso ezberdina izaten ari da. Zelan azaltzen duzu hori?
Bai, bueno, alde batetik, esplikatu etena izan da pixkat, aman komunean dauden, hau da, kasu guzti horien artean aman komunean dagoena. Hortan zentratu naiz pixkat, ez? Esplikatzeko, hau da, esan detena balio dezake, bai Eskoziarentzako, bai Euskal Herriarentzako, Katalunia edo beste hainbat nazioentzako lehen Amerika aipatu dituen horiek, ez? Ze askotan iruditzen zait oso garrantzitsua zergatiak azaltzea. Hitz egiten dugu asko independentziaz eta sezesioaz eta erabakitzeko eskubideaz, baina ez dugu zergatiaz hitz egiten. Bai, sozioekonomia, bai, ongizatea, ahuldu dala edo gutxitu dala, bai, baina zergatik, ez? Zergatia. Orduan, eta hor zergati horretan daude oso arrazoi desberdinak segun eta ze lurraldetan begiratzen dugun, baina oso igualak direnak ere. Eta orduan ni horretan zentratu naiz. Desberdintasunak ikaragarriak dira, batez ere, Britania Handia eta Espainia konparatuz kultura politikoarekiko oso desberdinak dira, eta gero ja barnera sartuz Katalanen kasua eta Euskal Herriko kasua ere oso desberdinak dira zentzu batean, edo pare bat zentzutan, eta bada gizartea oso desberdina dela, gizarte zibila Euskal Herrikoa ez dauka zer ikusirik Katalanen gizarte zibilarekin, eta batez ere beraiek edo hor gizarteak dituen beren arteko erlazioekiko, eta baita bertako gizarte zibila antolatuak alderdiekiko duen erlazioa ez dauka zer ikusirik hemen mugimenduek alderdiekiko duten erlazioarekin. Eta gero leialtasunaren kontzeptua oso desberdin, ez dut mamitzen da hemen edo Katalunian. Katalunian bozkak aldatu daitezke, eta hemen daramatzagu 40 urte bozkak aldatu gabe. Esan nahi, alderdien kopurua gutxi gora bera beti berdina da, 60-40 alde batetik eta gero 40 horretan erdi, esan nahi. Eta han Katalunian segituan, segun eta zein dan egoera, aldatzen dira boto pila, ez? Inkluso PSC batetik jun daitezke independentisten aldera, eta alderantziz segun zein dan egoera, hemen hori, imagina ezina da oraindik. Eta orduan, hori izango litzateke, nire ustez, desberdintasun garrantzitsuena beste bat, noski kopurua, hemen laukatu gea, han behintzat 6 milioi, eta hirugarrenik oso desberdina da hemen dauzkagun eskemak, eta lurraldetasuna barne sartuta, ez dizkigutela bat ere laguntzen. Nahi duguna lortzeko, bai alde batetik, bai bestetik, berdin du zer, eta aldiz, Katalunian hor lurraldetasunaren auzia bestera batera konpondu dute, ez? Orduan, zentzu horretan da desberdina gizartea. Eta gero, aman komunean dagona da, Estatu Espainiarra. Beraz, hortik ondoria berdina dira.
Osondo, galderak, komentariak, hori, biontzako, bai alentzako eta biorentzako, galderak eta komentariak. Ez badago honenik, nik galdetuko diot Alaneri. I just have another question for you. Do you think that what Julie has just explained helps you to understand the dynamics in Quebec as well, or is it too up in the air?
Well, there are many points that have been raised by Julie. I very much like the concept she used about state capabilities or capacity. This is something we don't discuss enough. But again, here we have to question ourselves, what is the state? Now, when I speak oftentimes with other colleagues here in the Basque Country or among the Galician or with the Catalans, the image of the state is only the central state. And I think we need to refine our own way, our own take on the state. I mean, for me, the state is also all the way down. That is that the Catalan parliament will be part of the state. The forces of authority will be part of the state. I think we need to make an effort to enlarge that notion, because this also gives credibility to your own claims that you're making toward the power that be, instead of always looking to Madrid as the top expression of what the state is. I think this is not, anyway, if I, as an outsider, this is not how I conceptualize it. I guess I've been influenced by the Scottish people. McCormick, Neil McCormick is probably one of the person who's done most for us in terms of imagining sovereignty, shared sovereignty, co-sovereignty, and also imagining the state itself. And I felt she was extremely alert in terms of the social mobilization. This is a domain that people before us, including Manuel Castells, in some of his work regarding resistance, and where is resistance to political domination comes from. It comes from civil society, essentially. And there we have lessons to learn from the Catalans, because we've been very impressed by the way they have mobilized, not discreetly, but they mobilize very strongly, but always respecting, well, not how would I put that? Not creating, not using any violence, so to speak. I think this has been something that they need to be to be stressed. So social mobilization in terms of political resources, in terms of resistance, in terms of renewed leadership, and civil society being probably the most important one, because civil society does not accept being controlled by politicians. It's something else, and this is what I think Catalonia is teaching us: civil society as the main instrument for self-determination, and then the politicians have to take notice of it. This has been something extremely important. I don't know. It's more of a comment.
Yes, but also, I mean, probably I'm talking about this, and I would like to know also Julia's opinion about this. There's been a profound transformation in the way that we understand social movements as well. So we tend to understand social movements as they were in the last century, but in the last 20 years, not only because the use of technology, but also I think it's connected with what Julia was explaining about the process of how democracy itself it's been deconstructed and probably has lost a lot of their original value. We see these new movements emerging that are not the traditional movements. So, for example, in Catalonia, and I think it's tried to raise the point before as well, there is not a disconnection anymore between the socio-political movement and the socio-economic movement. What in the past the traditional social movements would have a kind of a different personality. So do you see that kind of difference in the way that we understand the connection between the social movement and the political action?
You want me to? Okay. So, well, I don't know. I mean, the social movement is not my key field of interest, but I could venture to say that the main political actors which we have not analyzed in the 1960s in Canada or in Quebec in particular has been civil society. And this is the group that has been the most influential in bringing Quebec forward. And I assume that this is very similar now in the case of Catalonia. In the case of the Basque Country, I'm not well informed enough, so I don't want to go on that terrain. I think it would be not prudent on my part to go on that terrain. But perhaps to bring it back on my own terrain, which is more the political domain. As I mentioned in my own presentation, I discussed the key issue of federalism, democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law, and the protection of minority rights as the four main ingredients by which you can advance a society. And there have been people who always reduce it to, let's say, the central state or the rule of law. And I think this is, for us, I think, people working in the university, we need to react to that, and we need to challenge that position. because there is probably the most important out of these four elements that, in our case, the Supreme Court raised, is the one of constitutionalism, or if you want, ancient constitutionalism. And it's not because it's ancient, it's not good. It's not because the idea of sovereignty is an ancient idea that it's not good. So let's reflect a few moments on this idea of constitutionalism, because what are the key points there? The first point that needs to be taken into account for a minority nation is the idea of consent. Now, in ancient constitutionalism, this was the top element. You need to get the consent of the people. And obviously, we need to define who the people is. But I guess, I assume in the Basque Country, you've worked on this, and this has been challenged from time to time. In Catalonia, they seem to have done better in trying to define it on territorial terms. And in the case of Quebec, I think we have moved forward in defining that. So the consent of the people is the most important element. The second important element will be the idea of continuity, historical continuity. Now, the central state cannot challenge a nation that wants to continue to exist and be able to be a vibrant community. This is quite fundamental. And then, obviously, you will have, if you get that, you will develop loyalty, but it is a conditional loyalty. You cannot give blind loyalty to a central state. You have to give loyalty as long as the central state is responding to you in a proper way. Blindness has never helped anyone. So you need to show a sign of loyalty, but it's a conditional loyalty that is most essential. And as this takes place, as consent, historical continuity is being kept, reciprocity will be provided, and then obviously a community, a nation such as this one, will be much more hospitable toward the view of the central state.
Bueno, nik galderak baitu zute, hobeto bota, ni izan erantzuteko lehenengo, bai. Bai, guztiz ados. Hain zuzen ere, estatuaren kontzeptuaz, esan du nola batzutan oso esango genuke ez, harri moduko bat edo horma bat izango baliz bezala pentsatua dela, ez? Eta hain zuzen ere hori da egin behar ez dena. Hau da, estatua denok gara, badakit pixka dela hogasuna denok gara bezala, baina eta estaturik ez daukagunean, askoz ere zailagoa, ez? Baina estatuaz esan nahi du, lehen esan detena, Hego Euskal Herrian baditugu Euskal Estatu erakundeak. Naiz eta Espainiar Estatu erakundeak izan aldi berean. Eta horregatik, nik uste, eta askotan hitz egin da hau, desberdindu beharko litzatekeela, esan duguna askotan, hori, estatugintza formala eta estatugintza materiala. Estatugintza materiala izango litzateke deklarazio bat, independentea gea, baina estatugintza materiala da egunero estatua egitea. Eta estatua egiten da eskolan, estatua egiten da osasungintzan, eskola egiten da kalean, egiten da eta egiten dute sindikatuek, langileek, sanaet, estatugintza materiala. Hor kontua nik azpimarratzen nuena da estatugintza hori egiteko egin behar dena beti, bai estatua edukita edo ez, esan nahi, estatuz osatutako mundu batean, horregatik azpimarratu dut baliabideak behar dituzula estatugintza hori egiteko. Horregatik ez horren beste inkluso estatu formala izateko, hori deklarazioa da. Eta diplomazia da, baina berez estatu bat edukitzeko, estatugintza demokratiko bat egiteko baliabide dira, hau da, materiala da. Eta hori da, azken finean, jendeari kentzen diozunean, hori da kentzea subirautza esaten nuena, hori da kentzea boterea, hori da ahaldundu ordez, demokratizatu ordez botere hori, jendeak egin dezan, hori da, estatugintza hori, hau da, politika egin dezan, guztiz kontrakoa egitea, ez? Hain zuzen ere gaur egun, de hecho, tendentzia da estatuaren berriz kontzeptu trinko horretara bueltatzea, bai? Subjektu bakarra izango balitz bezala. Eta gainera, hain zuzen ere, diskurtso neoliberal baten barruan, non hori estatua gainera izan behar du zerbait oso mugatua, hertsia, eta abar, ez? Eta zinolako kontzepzio republikano batekin, badezue, edo parte hartzaile batekin. Eta horregatik, azpimarratzen dut hori, eta guztiz ados demokrazian, eta sistema demokratikoetan, estatugintza guztiok egin behar degula, guztiok egiten degula, nahi edo ez, egunero. Eta horregatik dira hain zuzen ere ezinbestekoak demokrazia batean baliabide horiek.
Ez badago aldera dokumentariorik, hemen, bai.
Kaixo guardion. Gainoni, lehenengo eta behin zoriondu egin nahiko nuke, nola Quebec izan da nazioarteko zuzenbideara paradigma berri bat ekarri duen erabakitzeko eskubidean inguruan, eta nola bide bat eman digun herriei, bide demokratiko eta politikoen bitartez, herria zer izan nahi dugun, elkarrekin norekin bizi nahi dugun erabakitzeko, ez? Eta bai galdetu nahi nizueke bioi, Alaini eta Juleri, prozesuetan, erabakitzeko eskubidea egikaritzeko prozesuetan, legeak edo legalitate printzipioak duen eginkizuna, ez? Ze Julerekin beti daukat eztabaida, baina iruditzen zait, Kanadako Auzitegi Gorenak aipatzen zuen bi printzipio oso legalitatearekin zerikusi handia daukatenak, bata konstituzionaltasuna, prozesu konstituzionala, eta bestea zuzenbide estatuaren printzipioa, ez? Eta printzipio hori Espainiako estatuak erabiltzen du, hain zuzen ere, Kanadako Auzitegi Gorenak aipatzen zuen kontrako helburu batekin, ez? Kamisa de fuerza bat moduan erabiltzen du legea, ez? Ez dut nahi zuen argazkia, ez dut nahi zuen herriaren borondatea, zuen gaitasun politikoa ez dut ikusi nahi. Ez dudan ez ikusi nahi, ez dizuet usten konsulta bat egitea. Guk badakigu ez dela legalitate problema bat, badakigu legearen arabera egin daitekela. Eta badakigu legeak bete dezakela hain zuzen ere herri horren borondate politikoa, gaitasun politiko hori irudikatzeko oso tresna garrantzitsua da. Ze mobilizazioak oso garrantzitsuak dira, eta bada demosa hori irudikatzeko tresna bat, baina Legebiltzarrean eta Kataluniako prozesuetan oso argi ikusten ari da, Kataluniako parlamentak hartzen dituenean erabakiak eta Legebiltzarren hartzen direnean, eta onartzen dituenean legeak prozedimentalizatuz borondate politiko bat nola osatuko dan, giza eskubide eta dauden berme eta interes guztiak kudeatuz, legalitate printzipioak horre baduz zer ikusirik, ez? Beraz, ikuste dut prozesu hauetan bete dezaketela bi ikuspegi, ez? Eta prozesu demokratizatzaileari begira, aber zein dan zuen iritzia.
Well, there's many points in there. The right to exist, the right to decide, obviously is something that is quite fundamental for any nation, and this is why I think when Julie made her presentation, she insisted very much on the fact that we have not reached a phase of post-sovereignty, we have not reached a phase of post-nation state. I mean, there have been people who I respect a lot, Michael Keating being one of those who always suggest that we are in a post-sovereign, post-nationalist, post-nation state era. Well, I challenge that too. I think we're not in that position. There are people who have different interests, who will want to see the nation, the communities disappear for a variety of reasons. Perhaps for economic reasons, enlarging the market. You know, we were listening to Mr. Avery this morning saying that we've been much more hospitable toward the new nation coming from the East. Of course we're more hospitable, not because we wanted them with us, with Europe, but we wanted the market. You know, this was essentially the reason why we've been showing interest into bringing in these new countries. But what is to be added with the Catalan or with the Basque country? There is no new market there. It's the same market. So there is no gain for the European Union to enlarge and to encourage the modification of the current nation, the current national multinational organization, because it doesn't change anything from anything on that front. With respect to the Supreme Court of Spain, the Constitutional Tribunal, I have to admit that as a Canadian here, take my Canadian hat, I can't believe what I see. I mean, normally you expect a court to be acting as a referee, as an arbiter, Now, that's not what we see in the current case. We see a court that is taking just the position of the central state. There's nothing in the constitution that stipulates that the Catalan people or other people, for this matter, can ask a question to the citizens. There's nothing that says you could or you could not. So I assume if it doesn't say, you can. But this is the Canadian side of me that speaks here. Now, the way that is being imposed on the Catalan people, that decision being imposed on them, I think is totally unacceptable. And it limits the option for negotiation, it limits the option for exchanges, it limits the option for decency, hospitality, dignity. And this is not, as a Canadian, this should not be tolerated by the European people themselves as a community. So, but again, there's nothing to be gained, in terms of market. There's nothing to be gained on that front. But it would be much more useful to take a different attitude with respect to these ideas. So this is what I'd like to provide you as a response.
Bai. Azken galdera, bale?
Bai, eskerrik asko. Espero dut galdera bikoitza izan alizatea, zen daukat banako galdera. Bat Alan Gainoni galdetu nahi nioke, ia bere eskema teorikoaren inguruan hiru bereizketa edo hiru kontraste egiten ditu. Ez dakit nola itzulia izan den euskerara, baina containment eta contentment. Alde batetik, ez dakit, eustea edo amore ematea, ez? Ez dakit nola itzulia izan den, baina hori da bat, ez? Beste bat da ezagutza edo ez ezagutza, ez? Recognition, misrecognition. Eta hirugarrena aipatzen duena da ahalmentzea edo boteretzea edo botere gabetzea, ez? Empower, disempower. Nire galdera da hirukote horretan harremanak nolakoak diren, alde batetik, vertikalak dira, contain, misrecognize, disempower batera datoz, alegia, eustea, ez ezagutzea eta gabetzea harreman vertikala dagoen hiru hauen artean, edo posible litzateke adibidez eustea ezagutuz, eustea eta ahalbidetuz. Eramango nau Julerentzako daukadan galderara, alegia ia zergatik ez den posible soberautza zentzu materialean, ez formalean, konpartitzea edo kidetzea, ez? Zer ikusten duen ia kontzeptualki bakarrik den batera ezina edo ia materialki ere batera ezina den, ez? Eta jarraitzeko hirukote hauekin, ia entzuten. Orain arte esandako guztia errepikatu behar aldut. Entzun da. Ia harreman hauek, content, eutxi edo amore eman, ia bakarrik bi planoen artean ematen diren, alegia estatua eta estatuazpiko entitate bat, ez? Kasu honetan, Kanada, Quebec, ekartzen badugu Europarantza, ia balio ote duen dikotomiak esplikatzeko gutxienez hiru planoen artean dauzkagun arazoak, alegia estatu kide, Espainia estatu kidea da, Espainiako erresuma estatu kidea da Europar Batasunean, eta Euskadi edo Katalunia estatu kide horren kideak dira. Ia, content dikotomia hori berfindu beharko ote genukeen beste plano zabalago edo handiago horretara eramanez, eta horrela blitz, ia Europar Batasunean Julek onartuko ote lukeen soberautza kidea edo kidetza hori, edo burujabe kidetza hori. eta nola ulertuko lukeen. Ia Grezia adibidez, subiraua izan ote daitekeen ala ez, Europar Batasunaren barruan, Grezia edo Espainia edo berdin dit nork, ez? Barkatu, igual komplikatua izan da nire galdera, baina. Zalantza hori geratu zait.
Perhaps to provide the first answer, well, thank you very much, Jose Ramon. Obviously, here there's a process, there is a successive expression of the democratic will, and the intention is not to be satisfied with current democratic practices, but to try to enlarge and deepen democratic practices. So we have experienced forms of democracy in various states, and you've done that in your own country. But it seems to me that there is a position that has been taken by many states, that is that how do you contain communities, how do you try to diminish their own claims on the central state, and this has been done variously. I mean, in the case of Europe, there's been a tendency to resymmetrize policy using the European Union, and also there's been a tendency to re-centralize power in the central government. So in the case of minority nation, at the periphery of the central state, obviously they've been at loss on the two fronts. So the more you centralize power, let's say in the European Parliament, the more the minority nation are losing, and the central state is taking advantage of it to re-centralize and re-symmetrize the policy. So this is in fact, as I said, you're losing on both fronts, and this is a strategy of containment. Now, there have been other forms by which communities have tried to develop their own position. One of them has been, I will use the word toleration. You have, the central state has tolerated different things in different regions, and the state of autonomy is an expression of such toleration. You have tolerated some management of the public purse by the autonomous community, either historic community or non-historic communities. But this is one phase in the process that ought to have developed in the case of Spain. I mean, people who signed the State of Autonomy's project or pact in 78, 79, 80, the idea was that you were just coming out of a phase that was not democratic, let's put it this way. And then this was the thing that they were going to provide you with. But obviously everyone said this is acceptable, but it's not because it's acceptable that you cannot improve upon it. And the idea is that how do we make a better series of institutions that will allow people to be better recognized, better represented. And this goes to phase number 3, which is the recognition. That you will recognize people for what they are. You know, when a people is a people is a people, a nation is a nation is a nation. So you cannot pretend to say that there will be 21 nation or 19 nation in the case of Spain. So this is simply there to diminish the value of the concept of nation, of the historic nation. You know, this notion of the café para todos obviously has been used very, very intelligently by Madrid, but it does a disservice for the historic nation that forms this land. So after the recognition, the 4th phase is the phase of empowerment. How do you empower the nation themselves? How do you give them the tools by which they will be able to project themselves, not just nationally, not just internally, but internationally as well? On that front, I think the Flemish and the Walloons have been doing much more better in trying to project themselves internationally. So this is a way by which you can empower a community. And this seems to have been denied to a lot of historic nations. And this is also, you know, you ought to continue, I guess, the process, the pressure on the central state to change and revert that. But at the same time, the first problem is the problem of the Constitutional Tribunal, which is not acting as a referee, but as a partisan tribunal. And this is very, very much questionable.
Nik zuzenean niri egindako galderak erantzungo dituz, berari buruzkoari inguruan nahi nuen zeo zer esan, baina denboraz ez gaude ondo. Orduan, galdetu ezu zergatik, ez da posible zentzu materialean soberania konpartitzea. Bueno, nik ezak ez zergatik izan posible, baina ez da posible izan. Nik ezakit posible izango dan. Orain arte argi geratu dana, Europar Batasuna hasi zenetik, da, eta Franco hil zenetik, hemen pixka batera doaz, ez dala izan posible. Orduan horregatik nik esaten nun, bueno, arrazoiak aztertu beharko dira, baina zein dena da aurrera jarraituko soberaniaren kontuarekin funtzionatzen ez baldin badu. Azken 30 urtetan ez du funtzionatu, hau da, martxan jarri zenetik. Klaro, hor zer gertatzen da, batzuentza funtzionatu duela, zenbait eliteentzako. Orduan oso erabilgarria da, baina zergatik nik usteet ez duela funtzionatzen. Ez ezin duela, bezik eta ez duela funtzionatzen. Ze ulertzen da, eta lehen esan dut, ulertzen da subirautza gauza bat bezala. Eta ez da gauza bat, erlazio bat da. Da ahalduntze erlazio bat. Orduan, hori konpartitzea ez da nik hartzen dut hau. Eta edalontzi desberdinetan jartzen dut eta konpartitzen dut soberania. Ez da hori, dira ahalduntze praktikak. Eta orduan ezin dana esan da Europar Batasuna subsidiarietatean oinarritzen dela eta kosoberanian eta guzti hori dagoela herria eta hiritarrak ahaldundetzeko eta sistema guztia demokratizatzeko nun aldi berean energia privatizatzen dezun, lobby, Europako Banku Zentrala den lobia indartzen dezun, parlamentuak, parlamentu bat egiten dezun inolako boterekin, bai, orain, azken aldaketa honetan, ko-decision eman zaio. Ko-decision, baina bi gauzen inguruan, ez zer gehiago ez. Eta gainera eske legebiltzarkideak esaten dute hau. Hau ja ez da pelikula bat nun. Ez, legebiltzarkideak, Europako legebiltzarkideak esaten dute ez dutela ezertarako balio Europar Parlamentua. Orduan, mesedez. Zu daukazunean sistema bat, erakunde bat, Europar Batasuna, nun legebiltzarra utzi dezun hor, Banku Zentrala elite finanzieroaren lobby bada, eta ejekutiboa dira estatu buruak, ez hitz egin mesedezko soberaniari buruz. Lan erreformak aurrera doaz, esan nahi dut, nahi dutena egiten dute herritarren ongizatearekin. Orduan, zer da kosoberania? Ze askotan esaten da, bai, Europar Batasuna lortu da, hain zuzen ere, estatuek beren soberania hori partekatu dutelako, hori da narratiba ofiziala. Ez? Claro, beren soberania partekatu dute. Zer partekatu dute? Beren boterea. Horregatik, berriz diot, boterea ez da baldin badaukazu, hori da estatuen boterea, herriak ez du botererik. Herriak botererik ez baldin badu ezin du partekatu, beraz, zer da kosoberania? Are gehiago, zer da estatu soberania, estatu demokratiko batean ez baldin bada herri subirautzan oinarritzen. Momentu honetan aparataje guztia dago, niretzako, estatituta, zirkuituak ez du funtzionatzen inolaz ere. Horregatik esaten, nik kosoberaniaren ideia oso polita iruditzen zait, eta oso erabilgarria izan daitekeela, baina guazen gauzak argi ustea. Ez du funtzionatu, zergatik ez du funtzionatu aztertu beharko da, eta nola egin funtzionagarria jarri beharko gea proposamenak egiten, ze ideia ona da. Ideia ona da, baina hori ez daukaz ikusirik Europar Batasunarekin momentu honetan.
Bueno, izut, Baskarian hitz egiteko oso bukaera proposa. Eta, bueno, gure batzue jarraitu beraien ideiak eta kontuak, oso aktiboak dire Twitterren, bebai, eta ikusten, aukera ona da, bebai, ez da. Lauretan, edo irutarditan. Irutarditan, bueltatzen gara ona, ez da? Eskerrik asko guztiei.
See the magical